Greetings everyone, welcome to another quick review. This time we're going to be looking at Tales of Zestiria, the latest Tales game to finally see a Western release. So before anyone freaks out or panics, I want to let you know, yes, I will be doing a full review for Tales of Zestiria. Although I wanted to get a video early on while the game was still relatively new, so that you could kind of hear my thoughts on it, and if you were on the fence, maybe this video will help push you on either side. So with all that said, let's get into it. First of all, there are 3 versions of Tales of Zestiria that you can acquire. There's the PlayStation 3 version, which is the original. From what I understand, there are some slowdown issues with the game, and it's generally not as pretty as the other versions. I've been playing the PlayStation 4 version, which is not by any means a remaster or anything like that. It's pretty much a straight up port of the game. It does look a little sharper than the PlayStation 3 release, and it runs a whole lot smoother. But from my understanding and some of the feedback I've been receiving from some of my own friends who've been playing the game is that the PC Steam version of Tales of Zestiria is the one to go with. It's the definitive version of the game. It allows for the game to run at the highest resolutions, it looks the sharpest, and it has options to further increase the rendering distance, which is something of a problem in the other versions. You're going to see a lot of pop-in. But regardless of which version you decide to pick up, or if you're interested in any version of the game, know that they're all locked to 30 frames a second. But before everyone freaks out, let me state this. It is noticeable. You can tell the game's running at 30. However, the game has been designed to run around 30, so it does not feel nearly as sluggish as, say, something like Tales Symphonia Chronicles, which was a game that originally ran at 60, then they simply reduced the frame rate to half, and you can definitely feel it. It feels a lot more sluggish. And Zestiria does not. It still feels smooth. It still feels very fast. It is noticeable though. It's not as smooth as 60, and obviously that would be optimal, especially with the PC version, given that you're running on more powerful hardware, and it would be nice to take advantage of that. However, the game logic is tied to the frame rate, so it's stuck at 30, but it's not necessarily that noticeable of an issue. It's not really a full-blown problem. It's suboptimal? Maybe, but it's not a full-blown problem. Before I get talking about the actual game itself, I do want to address this whole Alicia controversy. Initially, for the Japanese release, fans had a lot of backlash against Zestiria for how it handled the character of Alicia, who was somewhat marketed as the game's main heroine. Now, the problem being that she essentially is only in your party for about maybe 2 hours maximum if you're exploring absolutely everything. She's mainly there to serve as the inciting incident to get the main character, Sori, to leave his hometown of Elysium and go explore the world, essentially, and to become the main character. And she doesn't, that's all she really does. This was also regarded as a problem by Japanese players, since you could buy costumes for her, which cost real money, and then you couldn't really use them for the whole game because she was gone for most of it. Now, I myself have played past the point in which she leaves your party, and I can say I do not think it's necessarily that bad, because A, Alicia isn't really that fun to play as, in comparison to the other characters like Sore or Mikolo, but I don't think of it as that much of a problem, since A, she isn't that interesting of a character. She almost acts like a glorified cheerleader to Sore, always talking about how awesome he is, or how cool he is, or how he's so good at being the hero or something like that. I don't know, I never thought of her as that interesting. I don't think she's boring, I don't think she's a terrible character, but I don't think she would stack up to other heroines from other Tales games, and as such, I'm not really saddened by her loss. So that's all I'm going to say on Alicia, so let's just talk about the game. So, the story of Tales of Zestiria centers around this evil force called Malevolence. Malevolence corrupts people. It turns them into monsters called Hellions. It turns the various spirits of the world of Zestiria, called Seraphim or Seraphs, into Hellions as well, which are essentially just monsters that would further spread malevolence and turn other people into Hellions. And as well, it's the cause of all natural disasters, apparently. It turns some powerful enough spirits into giant evil dragons, and it's this terrible evil force. And throughout history, a individual called the Shepherd, no, not the Shepherd from Mass Effect, but the Shepherd, protects the people from this evil force. And using the powers of purification, he can defeat the Hellions. So, the story of Zestiria begins many years after the appearance of the last Shepherd, and the world is in what is known as the Age of Chaos, in which malevolence has spread throughout the entire world, Hellions are running amok, and there hasn't been a Shepherd for at least 50 or 100 years or something like that. and Sore, the main character, quickly becomes the newest shepherd, which is as no shock. And essentially Sore comes from a village where he was entirely raised by seraphs, and now he is the chosen one. He's the only person who can save the world. The story isn't really doing much for me. I like the approach that essentially the root of the problem in the world of Zestiria comes from people. It comes from our greed, our terrible emotions, you know, the 7 sins of man, essentially. I like that angle, but it's quickly becoming a story of good versus evil. I'm 12 hours in as of recording, and the story is very unappealing. It's not really that great. It's no Tales of the Abyss. It's not even a Tales of Vesperia. It's really everything. It's every plot from every other Tales game. It's a story that anyone slightly familiar with Japanese role-playing games is more than familiar with at this point. And I think this also stems from the fact that Sore, the main character, is literally every Tales character ever. He's a boy from a small town who's never been outside to see the world, and now he suddenly has the task of saving the world thrust upon him. And of course he accepts because he's a goody two-shoes. I do like how there's an angle to the story though, of how the characters are constantly telling Sore he has to stop pushing himself so far, and he has to stop trying to fix all the world's problems. I do like that, but overall the story isn't really anything you haven't seen before, and it's not going to be your main driving force to play through the game. So far, while the story isn't really anything special, I'm not also particularly attached to any of the characters. I already talked about Sore a little bit. He's basically every Tales character ever. He's nothing really special. I didn't really care for Alicia. I don't really care for Lila. Mikolos the straight man. Every character kind of seems like they're filling a role. We have all of the archetypes here from different Tales games, and I don't really think this cast really stands out. I do like Edna, the snarky Lolita character. She reminds me of Toph from Avatar: The Last Airbender, so that's always a good thing. But while I don't think the characters themselves are really unique or all that amusing, I do enjoy their interactions together. I think the different characters play really well off one another in various different skits and cutscenes. There are a couple of humorous ones. It's not like Grace's F levels of humor or Vesperia, but it gets you interested in the characters more so than they do individually. But let's talk about the actual gameplay. One of the biggest changes for Zestiria from the Xillia games is that it has a lot of giant fields and open space that you can fully explore. And you're highly encouraged to, as well, as you're constantly rewarded with stat boosting items, which are very plentiful and always worth finding. And there's treasure chests absolutely everywhere, so at every single turn in the game, you are constantly being rewarded for exploring, which is a big deal in Zestiria. And I definitely prefer this type of world design much more than the highway or railway kind of design we had in the previous Tales games like Grace's and the Xillia games. Various combat systems seem very reminiscent from Tales of Grace's F, which is a good thing since that's arguably, from a gameplay and combat standpoint, the best in the entire Tales series, at least in my opinion. So with combat, all of your martial arts are tied to the circle button, which you're essentially at the beginning of the game, you're just kind of mashing circle and you do different attacks. And when you hold different directions, you'll use different hidden arts, which are, your demon fangs, your tiger blades, the usual typical arts. And then the X button is your seraphic arts, which are different magical spells or certain different abilities. And like other Tales games, you're chaining these. Zestiria's biggest innovation, to speak, is, if you've been following the game at all, Armatization, which acts like a fusion between human and seraph characters. And this feature can be accessed at any point in battle by simply pressing L1, and fusing with different seraphs will grant this fused form a different weapon, which grants different combos, different elemental attributes, and it's one of the key factors to succeeding in battle, particularly the boss fights. Overall, I really enjoy this battle system. I'd argue it's one of my favorite battle systems. I much prefer it to the Xillia battle system and using the tether system. And Armatization's a lot of fun. It's really fun and easy to use in battles. You're encouraged to use it frequently. The one problem you get from Armatization, though, is that you need to have at least 2 human characters out at all times, as you need to tie a seraph character to them. And either human character can switch between their equipped seraph, which act as the other party members. So this means that the game is best played with 2 players over 4, since players 3 and 4 aren't necessarily going to be playing as the characters they want to, as you're going to be constantly switching seraphs, and as well when you fuse, the other players will lose control of their character. So this is a game that's best suited to 2 human players, not 4. In this video, I'm not going to describe the different leveling systems, I'm not going to describe item fusion, the grid, the equipment grid, I'm not going to describe all of that, I'll save that for the review, but I will kind of speak about my biggest issues with the game. The foremost, which is the camera. This is arguably one of the wonkiest cameras I've ever experienced in an action RPG in some time, which is not a good thing. I don't know if many of you recall, but in Tales of Symphonia, when we played the 2 players, the first major camera issue was that the camera focused on player 1, and that meant whoever's playing player 2 would have their view obscured whenever player 1 focused on a certain enemy and moved away from player 2. This issue is somewhat similar in Zestiria, although it's about how you lock onto different enemies. Because of the angle of the camera, when you're locked onto a specific enemy, it will only follow that enemy, meaning that it'll obscure everyone's view, which is mind-numbingly stupid. And it really is a big problem. It's solvable as you can lock onto a different enemy, and it only really happens when the enemy's running really far to the edge of a battlefield or is trying to rush into another character. But it is a problem, and it happens quite frequently inside various dungeons. And while I'm on the topic of dungeons, the layouts for the different dungeons are not very inspired. They come off as very maze-like, and you're pretty much encouraged to explore every single path because there's always treasure or always an item awaiting for you if you do so. And while I'm still complaining, I'll also say that I found that during boss fights there'd be sharp difficulty spikes, as I find the game to be fairly easy for the first few hours. I'm playing on the difficulty just under hard, mainly because on hard mode you get less experience, and I don't want that. I want to keep the same experience, so I'm on the difficulty above normal but below hard. And on this difficulty, I've had no problems fighting basic enemies. In fact, I'd argue it's quite easy fighting basic enemies. But bosses, on the other hand, do considerable damage. They can pretty much kill any character in 2 or 3 shots consistently for various different fights, and you need to really master the battle system to succeed on this higher level of difficulty, which I thought served as a big difficulty spike between basic gameplay. As well, another complaint I have is that skits are only viewable at save points and at various vistas on the world map, which I found to be very odd since skits have always been an integral part of the Tales experience, and they're always viewable pretty much everywhere, and I thought that was a silly decision to restrict them like that. As well, the game kind of starts off slow. You don't have full access to all the combat mechanics until you're about 6-7 hours in. But I'd definitely encourage getting past that slow start because Zestiria is very fun to play. Don't let my complaints detract you. It's a very enjoyable battle system and I'm really enjoying it. I'd say so far, I'm enjoying Zestiria more than both Xillia games, even combined. And that's saying something. I've already spoken about the graphics a little bit. Visually, it's still a PlayStation 3 game on whatever system you're playing it on. It's very much a straight port. It is visually more impressive than the Xillia games, mainly because of the seamless transition to battles and cutscenes from basic gameplay, which I think is pretty neat. As well, I do enjoy the return to a medieval fantasy world, which is nice to see in the Xillia type visual style. And we haven't really had a medieval game since Vesperia, which I think is a welcome return. So the graphics are definitely a 2013-14 release. So while the visuals most likely won't really impress anyone, the game's soundtrack is absolutely outstanding. I'd argue this is, if not the best Tales soundtrack, one of the best in the entire series. It's right up there with Legendia in my eyes. Or my ears, I should say. I've had an absolute joy listening to this. My only regret for not getting the collector's edition is that I'm missing out on the game's soundtrack, which I think is awesome. I will not shut up about how much I love the game's music. If you follow me on Twitter, I have not shut up about it yet. I'm loving it, really enjoying it. The voice acting includes both Japanese and English audio, and I think the English, the English audio, the English cast, mostly, they do their job. I'm not necessarily saying it's the best dub a Tales game has ever seen, but, everyone's doing well. And there's a lot of voice actors I haven't really heard that often. There's even a Little Karibo, known for Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged and Dragon Ball Z Abridged, is even a voice actor in this game, which I thought was pretty cool. And obviously, if you're a purist, they have the Japanese audio, that's there. So to wrap things up, I don't think Tales of Zestiria is the best Tales game ever. It's not the most refined release. The story and characters kind of leave a little to be desired. and they're not really anything you haven't seen before. The combat system, while really fun and addictive, and the exploration, which always encourage you to explore, they're really well done. They have a couple issues, but overall, I'm enjoying Tales of Zestiria immensely. I absolutely recommend it to Tales fans if you haven't already picked it up. So that's all for this video. I'll see you guys next time.